Good morning. My name is Kyle Houchins. I'm a technical trainer for McNeil, and this is Getting Started Rhino 7 for Windows. And today we're going to build this little toy boat. I had a previous life as a toy designer before I joined McNeil, and Rhino was the software I used to do my job on a daily basis. And so I'm taking a little trip down memory lane and dipping back into my toy industry roots, and we'll take a crack at this thing. The the way that I start every project, and in this case I have a sketch, and in this case it's a particularly bad sketch, and so I'll move it around on the screen so you can't see how terrible it is. But the idea is this is just a notion or a um, it's just the beginnings or the zygote of an idea, right? And the goal of this is to kind of say, I want to do kind of something like this. And I don't spend a lot of time sketching anymore. I used to. I used to live in the world where I lived or died by sketches. I have a transportation design degree from Center for Creative Studies in Detroit, and drawing was king there. And I actually graduated before 3D modeling even became available. It was a while ago, but I don't really draw anymore, as you can probably clearly see by this sketch. But what I do is I do tons of little thumbnails um, just to get an idea of where I want to go. And in this case, I kind of want to do this chunky little boat. And so what we're going to do is use the sketch merely as a guide for proportion and scale and gesture and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to kind of move away from the sketch and do all of our designing in 3D. And that's one of the things that I love best about Rhino, especially as you get faster. And we're going to talk a lot about how to get faster when we do this. I know this is a getting started video, but I think part of graduating from that fear of clean sheet where you're staring at a blank page or a new program where you're trying to figure out what all the tools do, to the point where you're actually turning into a productive designer where you can start actually using this tool for your job, is this concept of like, okay, this is how you do the task, but also this is how you do the task faster. And we're going to talk a lot about that kind of as we go. So I hope not to leave new folks who have never touched Rhino before in the dust. If you feel like you're just getting run over by the bus, hit the chat and I'll be happy to clarify stuff. But I am going to try and focus a little bit on how to do something like this, which is a fairly ambitious build for an hour and a half. I'm going to try and figure out how to do that, so that we can do it in that time frame. Once you get to the point where you can comfortably kind of crank models out like this at that type of speed, now the drawing board becomes a little less important, because instead of spending all day doing sketches and sketches and sketches and sketches, you can spend all day doing a couple of really quick thumbnails and then jumping right into 3D, making your decisions in 3D, because we all know we can lie, cheat, or steal with sketches, right? You can just like make anything look amazing in a sketch, and then when you try and transfer it into 3D, you're like, oh, none of this actually works in 3D. So I prefer, just over the years, I've kind of migrated my personal design process more into 3D, because it allows you to get to the end result faster, because all the lying, cheating, and stealing goes away, right? So until it comes time to send the bill. So, but so I every time I start a new project, I start with a sketch, and I'll usually start it in front view, and I will usually bring the sketch in using the picture command, and I'll just run through that for the new folks. If you run the picture command and then find your sketch and just drag it into the scene, it comes in just as a plane, and the plane with an image mapped onto it. The plane, you can do anything you want to it. You can move it, scale it, rotate it, copy it. I can drag this with Gumball and tap the Alt key, and I can make a copy of it, which is the same thing you can do with any regular surface. I can also click on this, go to my Materials tab, which if you don't have a Materials tab, right-click on any other tab and check the Materials tab. And then come down here to the transparency, and I'm going to just crank the transparency up a little bit, which is going to fade the image and make it a little easier to model over. I'm going to then go to my layer stack. I'm going to make a layer for the image. I'm going to right click, change object layer. I'm going to make the default layer the current by moving the check mark, and then I'm just going to lock the image layer. And that way it's in the scene. I can do whatever I want with it, but it's out of the way. And because I slid it back in space, I can model with, you know, in shaded view, and the image doesn't bisect the model. It drives me crazy when the image bisects the model like this, because you can't see anything, especially in shaded view. So I always move this back in space. It still lines up in front view, which is what I needed it to do. And if you need to see the image, you can certainly pull it forward, and then that way it's in front of the model. I usually like to work with it behind the model because I'm doing most of my work in wireframe when I'm laying stuff out. So I'm going to lock that. And then the next thing, we're going to just talk about, like, how are we going to get here? We have to break this thing down. And I'm going to switch to pen mode here, and we'll do a little chalkboard talk. So because this is an early concept model, I'm not going to worry too much about like shelling or wall thickness or anything crazy like that. I'm imagining that this is going to be something that I'm going to just jam together and throw through a printer and throw on a desk and see what people think of it, or sit it in the water and see if it floats. I worked for Fisher-Price for years, and I've done millions of little toy boats, and there was another designer who had a ton of experience there, and he would always walk by your desk and look over your shoulder and say, "Boy, that's cute." And you'd say, "Yeah," and then he'd say, "You know, cute doesn't float, right?" Because typically speaking, when you do something that's super cute and you stick it in the water, it flips upside down and sinks. So we could do you know, the toy version of what hydrostatic testing is to make sure that this thing doesn't flip over and sink and all that kind of stuff after we throw it through a printer. But let's break this down and say, okay, let's say that this section down here is one chunk, right? So this is going to be the first piece that we're going to make. It has a little rudder detail, which is no problem. We can add that, no problem. It's got this little anchor detail here that we need to worry about. But this is all, and then maybe some little ribs or chines or whatever's going on here that we wanna work on. All right, so this is going to be our first piece, and I think this is probably a good NURBS, part. And if we look at this in perspective, it's probably going to look something like this, right? And it's going to the section is just going to look something like that, right? Maybe it's got a flat bottom on it. Maybe it doesn't. We'll make a decision later and try and figure out what we're going to do with that as we go. The next section that we want to look at is this top section, and this has to kind of clamshell over this. I'm imagining that this actually, if we were to cut a section like through here, it's going to come up, it's going to come down, it's going to have a deck, and then it's going to, come up the other side, and it maybe is, shelled like this, where it's got the deck that sits on top of this other piece down here, right? Something like that. So we have to kind of figure that out, and it looks like I've drawn it so that this actually comes down farther like that. So we have to kind of figure out what we're going to do there, and then and that'll be a piece unto itself, right? And so then so that'll be the second chunk, so to speak. And I always, when I refer to chunks, I like to work in pieces that are all solid and watertight. And then that way I know as I progress through the model that everything is going to make sense. The third chunk that we need to deal with is this section right here. And this is just essentially just going to be an extruded shape, right? I'm imagining it's going to be something that just looks like this. And we'll see how that works in 3D, whether that works in 3D or not, but that's kind of how I see it in my head right this minute. And then the last section we need to deal with is this little cabin. And this, I'm imagining, is probably going to be a shape that we're going to overbuild like this. And then we're going to do some trims through here. And then we're going to add some little ribs or whatever to make the windows and stuff like that. And we'll figure that out. And this does actually have to be shelled out, so we'll have to manage that and figure out how to handle that as we go. All right, and then the last piece would be, you know, the little cockpit up here and the little details and the flag and all this stuff. And that's all, you know, fairly simple, and I think we can get there. So that's my plan. We'll see. As Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, and live demos are a lot like being punched in the face. So we'll see whether my plan holds up, and go from there. So the first section I want to start with, and I'm going to mute for a second and clear my throat because it's early here and my voice is already starting to crack on me. Hang on just a second. All right, so let's go ahead and build this piece. And for the bottom section here, I'm going to just lay this out with straight lines. And you may say, well, that seems dumb. And I'd say, well, I could see how you could say that. The other thing that is in the vein of going fast, I have actually edited my line button to have a single line under the right mouse button. This is the default behavior. On my left mouse button, which is what I use all the time, I've made a 4-point line. And this, I'm going to copy this for you so you can have it in the chat if you want to make one yourself. This is an alias to make a 4-point line. And the cool thing about that is these are a degree 3 4-point line, which means when I turn the points on, I have points to play with. And the cool thing about having points to play with is I can very quickly now start making high quality curves because the points are already there. If I didn't have this, if I was just doing this out of straight lines, I would do a straight line, which only has 2 points, right? I would change the degree and I would change that to 3, and that 3 degree now gives me the 3 points that or 4 points I need in order to be able to edit. So I just made a little edit to this button. If you hold down Shift and right click on the button, it brings up this button editor. And I moved the default stuff over to the right mouse button because I use that less. And I wrote this little 4-point. Well, I didn't write it. Pascal wrote it because I'm too dumb to write it on my own, and I had to ask him. So Pascal sent me this, and so that's what I use now for my straight line instead of regular straight lines. So so if we go through here and I just pull the points and I get my basic shape, if I go to perspective view, you can see that that's lovely, but it doesn't really get me anywhere. And so what I'm going to do is grab all of these points, and I'm just going to go like that. Now I've got a Bodhi shape, right? And then I'm going to grab these and maybe these, and I'm going to pull them back in. And then I'm going to pull maybe these back out. Should have left those where they were. And I've got, very quickly, a high quality kind of construction for our Bodhi McBoatface, which I love the story behind Bodhi McBoatface. If you haven't heard that story, the British government built this amazing new research vessel filled with millions of dollars of scientific equipment, and then they had a contest and let the British people decide the name of the boat, and the name that won was Bodhi McBoatface. And the British government was horrified and said, well, we're not going to name it that, and they named it something else. And there was so much outrage about the fact that they had ignored the will of the people that the boat stayed the same name, but one of the minor little drone vessels on it, they actually named it Bodhi McBoatface to placate the masses. But so Bodhi McBoatface, this is for you. So we're going to mirror these curves, and that gives us our basic shape. And then we can decide, and because I did the mirror with history down here, I said always record and update children. If I come over here and I turn the points on for this, and I edit these points, this is where I can now start to make choices in 3D. And I can say, well, that's probably not enough McFace for Bodhi McBoatface. So we're going to need to pull the shape a little bit, and I want it to be a little bit kind of chunkier, and maybe we want it to peel in a little bit at the back instead of being straight to give it a little bit more character. And this is where we do, you know, the design, right? We're doing design now instead of just CAD modeling. I was referred once by somebody who I wasn't a huge fan of as a CAD monkey once, because all I did was trace drawings all day. And I'm like, you know, A, I don't like you anymore. B, there's a lot more to it than that, because basically what, you know, as we talked about before, you can lie, cheat, or steal with a 2D drawing. And so there's a lot of interpretation. And so that's why I don't spend a lot of time with my 2D drawings. That's why I spend most of my time designing here. And so so that's where we are with this. And then the last thing that we're going to do is just connect these two sides, right? And we have the basic layout that we need in order to figure out what the main shape of this bottom chunk is going to be. And just because it's a toy, I'm going to add a little zhuzh to the back there to make it a little bit more interesting. And so we've got everything that we need in order to make this thing. So let's just use this edge surface tool, and that lives up here. By the way, if you are interested in learning how to modify a pop-up, I just dropped a YouTube video yesterday on our Rhino site for modifying this middle mouse button. So there's a video on how to get this menu to look like this if that's what you want to use. But so let's use this edge surf. We're just going to build a surface out of 4 curves. Right, and we already made it once. There's no reason to make it again, so I'm just going to mirror it, and then we're going to do this. And I'm going to build this off the curves, not the surface edges. And this is the main part of our boat. Now, we have a choice to make. We can do a dead flat bottom, and we can do that just by lofting this curve to this curve. And let's do curve to curve. There we go. And then we can just match this edge or whatever we want to do. But I think I want a little chine down the center. I think I want this to have a little. I think I'm not a boat guy, but I think that's referred to as keel. So I'm going to draw a line from here to the midpoint here, and I'm using a midpoint snap. I also run my snaps disabled. You'll notice that this disabled button is checked. The Alt key is the temporary turn on, turn off for that. And I have my mid snap picked here. So I'm just going to snap, and it's the quad is picking. It's the quad and the mid are at the same position on this model. So I'm going to just drop that there, and then I'm going to grab these points. And I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm just going to pull these down and give myself a little keel here. And if there's a boat guy here or boat person here that I'm murdering the names, please tell me so I don't continue to sound dumb through the rest of the video. All right, so let's do that. And then because I want this to be a sharp line, I'm actually going to loft from here to here. And then I'm going to loft from here to here. And loft is very sensitive to your pick location. So I'm going to do that. And that gives me that little sharpness at the bottom. Now, this doesn't match back here, and that's fine. I'm not terribly concerned about that because I can always do match surf. And let's just go ahead and do that. So we're going to do match surf, and we're going to match from here to here. And I am going to do position. I am not going to average them, and I'm not going to refine it. And I'm going to match by closest points. So what originally looked like a disaster with the right settings actually is what we wanted, which is we just want to touch it. We want to match to the closest points to where this is, and we're not going to average the surfaces. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. And you'll see that that closes that up and gives us what we need. And I can play with this and let's see, I may have lost history by doing the match. Let's see. Yeah, so I lost the history there. So let's back up a little bit and let's edit this and say, you know, how much keel do we want out of this? Do we want it that much, or do we want less? If we go to the front view, is the bias of this curve correct? Do we want it, you know, biased this way, or do we want it biased this way? I think probably more up here. And so these are the choices that you can make, and I'm actually moving points using my mouse keys. And oops, I don't want to move those. Make sure I'm grabbing just the curve points. Here's all I want. So I can move these with my mouse keys, and that is the nudge. And if you haven't used nudge before, I highly recommend it, especially for point editing. If we go tools, options, mouse, these, nope, not mouse, it is in general. Nope, it is in, where is it? Keyboard, come on, where are you? Modeling aids. There we go, duh. Modeling aids, tools, options, modeling aids. These are your nudge here. So I have it set to use my arrow keys, and then the nudge key alone I have set to 0.1 units. The control plus nudge I have 0.01, and then shift plus nudge I have 0.25. And that gives me a couple of different options for the coarseness of my editing. I'm just going to mirror this, and then I'm going to match surf from this, oops, from this one to this one, and use those settings. And because we did it with history, it's going to match that as well. So let's join this. And then we're going to show edges, which is here. And we want to make sure that we don't have any pink on the stuff that we've already done. And in this case, we don't. So I'm going to just go ahead and finish this up by lofting from this polysurface edge to this polysurface edge. And then I'm going to match surf from here to here. And we join. And that is our first chunk, and we can click it and say that this is a closed polysurface added to the selection. So this is what I mean when I refer to chunks, right? I want to make sure that this piece by itself at this stage of the model is completely closed and is something that I could throw to an engineer in SolidWorks. I could mesh it and throw it to a printer. I could send it to an animator. I could do whatever I wanted, right? Because it's in good shape. This is a solid, valid, good thing. Now, at this point, I'm probably going to take my curves, and I have a hotkey set up for cell curve, but that's the command, SEL-CRV. And I'm going to make a curves layer, because one thing was absolutely positive truth in the toy industry, and that means you are never done until the budget runs out or the deadline has passed. And so that means that we did tons and tons and tons of iteration along the way, or at least I did for my clients, did tons of iteration, and then I was tasked with trying to handle that. So let's make the chines on the side of this, because we're already here, we might as well. And I'm going to pull a curve off of this surface, and I'm going to use this extract iso curve. And I'm just going to click on this surface. I'm going to go to the front view. And then I'm going to hit the T key, which is toggle, and that changes direction. And I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one here. And then I'm going to go to the split, which lives here. And I'm going to split this by a point. And I'm going to split it where the end of that is. And I'm going to split this where the end of that is. Get rid of the other pieces. And I have a curve. Actually, I'm going to split the backs of it off as well. Everybody still with me? Am I losing anybody yet? All right, so there's my chine lines. And I'm just going to make these chines. I'm going to simplify these shapes. I'm not going to get crazy with them. I'm going to use a capped pipe. And I'm going to just select this rail, and I'm going to do, I don't know, I'm going to eyeball this. Something about there. Right click to accept, right click to accept, and it makes this wonderful little detail. I'm going to do the same thing again. Make sure I got the right one. And because it remembered the settings from last time, I'm just going to click the curve, and then I'm going to right click, right click, right click, right click, and it's going to just use the same settings so that those match. I'm going to mirror these over. And you know, if I was going to get super fussy about this, I'd probably make this more of a chine shape, which is you know, kind of tangent here, sweeps out to a point, and then sweeps back tangent. But you know, time constraints. I'm going to grab all of this and I'm going to Boolean it together. And I'm just going to stick those together. And it looks like one of them failed. Actually, it looks like all of them failed. And the probability of why that failed is probably to do with this seam right here. That's the seam. If I were to change the seam on this or rotate it around so that it was in a different spot, the Booleans would probably work, but I don't really have a whole lot of time or interest in trying to figure out why that's failing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just nudge this guy in just a tiny bit. I'm going to just pull it so that the seam is just inside the model. And it doesn't change the shape of my part very much. And in this case, because it's a concept model, I don't really care. And I'm going to just, those should have updated by history, but I want to make sure that they did. Nothing is more annoying than shipping something and then finding out that it's asymmetrical. And let's try to Boolean this again. And in this case, it works because we got rid of the seam. The way to diagnose why a Boolean failed is to use the intersect command right here. The object intersection will show you a curve of where the two objects intersect. And if there's a problem, you'll see it in the curve. It'll either be like a little mess, and I'm tangling my fingers up, but you can't see that, or it'll have a break, or it'll have something will show up in the curve, and that'll tell you where the problem with the Boolean is. But just with my years of experience, I know that seams, especially singularities, because this is a sphere, so it has a singularity at the end. A lot of times, if we're within the file tolerance distance, which is if we go to Tools, Options, Units, if we're kind of within this distance between the seam and a surface where it has to make a Boolean, there's a lot of times that it will fail. So managing the seam is something that you want to kind of work with. Now, pro tip, every surface like this does have a seam, and this is the seam right here. There is a command called surf seam, which allows you to change where the seam is. So if the seam is problematic right here, run surf seam, put it over there. And we could have done that, but the problem is I would have had to do it 3 times for each one of these, and I'm lazy, so I didn't want to do it. It's easier to just nudge the thing and call it a day. But if you want to get fussy and you really, really need it to be exactly where it is and you can't deal with that, surf seam is the way to get rid of it, because you can just move it. It doesn't get rid of the seam, but it gets rid of the problem because it can move the seam to a place where it doesn't have an impact. Now, there is a way to actually mitigate this singularity down here. You run the smooth command and it actually opens up the end, which you can put a little cap on that. That's a hassle for another day, so I'm not going to get too worried about that. All right, let's throw our little rudder on here. Let's go to wireframe and let's throw our rudder on here. And I'm just going to draw this. 3 points to make a corner, no more nor less. Don't use 16 points to make a corner. You'll make the NURBS gods angry. And I'm just going to make this into a planar surface. It's already centered in the model. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to extrude it, holding the dot And then I'm going to hold down the shift key and it goes in both directions. And that's going to do that. Now, I can do one of two things here. And the typical MCAD SolidWorks, way of handling this would be to throw a fillet on here, but I don't like how fillets look for toy stuff. So I'm actually going to delete this surface and I'm going to put these together using a blend surface. Blend surfaces tend to be a lot more friendly and puffy and soft and fun for toy stuff. And so I typically don't use fillets. I typically use blends for stuff. And you can see that that has a little bit more toy-like feel, and I think that's probably a little thin. So let's chunk it a little like that. And I'm going to leave it alone for now because I think I want to do fillets on this boat or blends on this boat at a later date. So I'm going to leave this just as a solid chunk, and I can prove that it's a solid chunk by using my edge analysis. And it says it's got 38 edges, but none of them are naked, none of them are non-manifold. So this is a closed watertight object, one closed poly surface, right? So this is a chunk, this is a chunk. We can at any time just go boop and Boolean these together, right? But I don't need to right now because I know these are good. Even if I were to take this and mesh it and throw it through a printer, this would print fine, even though these pieces are overlapping. The printer would just stick them together. They don't care, as long as the parts are watertight and closed. All right, so let's look at the next piece, which is this piece up here. And let's stick this on a layer, and we're going to change this. And I can't stand modeling in colors. I don't know why, but it's just a pet peeve of mine. So I'm going to just change this to gray. And we'll double click and rename this to Body Bottom. And then we're going to just hide it for now, just so it's out of our way. We'll go back and deal with the anchor at the end when we do some of the other details. So now we have to do this thing. And we know that this has, this shape, right? We talked about this earlier, where it has, if we did a cross section through there, it kind of comes up like this. It goes over, it comes up like that. I'm going to build it just solid for now. And then if we need to core this out, right, we'll worry about that at a later date. Okay, but for now, I'm just going to build this as a chunk, and we're going to manage the rest of it as needed. As my roommate used to say, we'll burn that bridge after we cross it. Or actually, no, he used to say, we'll burn that bridge before we cross it. All right, so we're going to use our straight lines again. And in this case, I'm using my 4-point straight line, which is a degree 3. And I'm just going to pick kind of the locations for where the main elements are going to be. And you don't have to get crazy because we're obviously going to edit this. I'm going to select all of these and say curve points on. And then we're going to just start very quickly editing and modifying to get our shapes. And this looks like this has a little more of a bias up to like that. So that shape's kind of doing what I want it to do. This shape is kind of doing what I want it to do. Now, I probably should bring this back up so that I can make sure that this curve, family of shapes with the bottom. So maybe what I'll do is I'll lock this for now and then make sure that this point, and I can do this in wireframe so it's a little easier to see. This point is more in line with, and I'm going to use my arrow nudge to make sure that it lines up with this. And the key here is just to make sure that I'm overlapping. I don't want to, maybe I'll trim the top of it off. Maybe I'll just Boolean them together. Maybe I'll whatever. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. But the goal is to make sure that, these things are all intersecting so that at the very worst case scenario, like let's say I just wanted to do an early test, I would throw this to a printer without any fillets on it at all, knowing that there's a good chance that I'm going to come back and iterate anyways. And so why do I want to go to the hassle of putting the fillets in on, my first pass concept model when I am very likely going to have to come back into these surfaces and mess with them at a later date. So I typically, if I was going to just do this to start with, I would probably not actually put the fillets on to begin with. So let's grab this. Same thing we did before. We're just going to grab these points and pull them out. and start establishing our shapes. And I'm going to deselect these by drag control selecting, and then I'm going to pull these out, and that gives us our ability to be able to kind of see how those line up in top view. And I'm going to shift these forward a little bit and then go back to front view and see how that, and I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's probably a pretty good representation of what we want. I think that gives us enough overlap. We can always pull it farther if we need to, just by grabbing this and pulling it out. And it looks like I've got a curve down there for one of my chines that has become orphan, so I'm going to get rid of it. And so I can hide this now because I know I'm kind of in the same, I'm about where I'm supposed to be. And I'm going to just do a four-sided surface, edge surf, and I'm going to just drag select all of those, and it makes the surface with the drag select, which is a cool way to kind of speed up that process. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of curve to this by pulling these 2 points out, and you can see that it puffed that surface. History went and puffed that surface out, which is kind of what I wanted it to do. So let's mirror this and see what it looks like in relationship to our body bottom. And in this case, it looks pretty good. I'm pretty okay with that. So let's just quickly go through, and I'm going to just edge surf these two together. And I'm going to edge surf the top of this together. And let's add a little bit of curve to this. So let's pick this surface and turn its points on. And you can see that this is a degree 1 surface. It doesn't have any points in the middle, which is not entirely awesome. See how it's got a point here and a point here and nothing in the middle? So we need to change its degree. And you can see that in the U degree, it's set to 1. So let's change that to 3. And then it's already set in the V degree to 3 because that's the way it was already. So now we've got 2 points in the middle, and we can pull these out. So let's bring the body bottom back. Say that 5 times fast. And that gives us this kind of thing, right? So we can, and again, we're making our decisions in 3D. We're looking at this thing. This is real. Like, you're designing this and it's real, and you're making your decisions in 3D so that you know when the thing comes off the printer, it's going to look exactly like you wanted it to look, right? It's not like, you know, you threw a sketch somewhere and it comes out and you're like, wah, wah, looks terrible. All right, so we need to get a deck on this thing. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can actually pull a trick, which I actually am a big fan of. So I'm going to actually extract this surface. And then I'm going to use Gumball, and I'm just going to squish it in like this. And then I'm going to squish it in like this. And then what I'm going to do is go to my front view, turn my points on, and I'm going to realign it just kind of visually, right? I don't need to get crazy. This is a toy. Nobody cares whether it's historically accurate, unless it's a historically accurate toy, and then you have to care. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to just knit this up, right? I'm going to go from this edge to here. I'm going to go from this edge to here, and then I'm going to go from this edge to here, and I'm going to join all of this up. And you say, well, that seems dumb. And I say, yeah, maybe on the surface. But then I can Control-Shift-Click, and I can extrude this face down. And there's my deck. Ah, maybe he's not so stupid after all. Maybe he just looks stupid, and sounds stupid, and walks stupid. But he models okay. So that's that chunk there. And I probably would soften these. You know, we'll do that later, but for the time being, we'll see how much time we have. So we're 40 minutes now, and I want to make sure that we get most of the details built. So let's assign this to, we'll call this Bodhi Mid. And again, I hate modeling in colors. I don't know why, that's always been a pet peeve of mine, but I'm going to change this to this. Now, we can also start if we go to rendered mode, we can start playing with our colorways. And sometimes this is helpful. I'm just going to make a plastic, and let's call this, get rid of that. Let's call this blue. Let's call this blue. Not red, let's call it blue. And then let's drag this on, not to there. Oh, that's locked, that's why. See, I do all the dumb things so you don't have to. So let's pick these. Come now. Come now, Bodhi. Mustn't keep mother waiting. All right, let's assign that, and then let's make a new plastic. I'm just going to duplicate this. And then let's make this one orange-ish. I don't know, something like that. Very, very classic toy colorway, which I've never liked, but kids seem to. Actually, let's maybe make this yellow because I really don't like that. Let's push that a little bit more like that. All right. So as you can see, like this is another way that you can kind of say, okay, well, do I like the graphic of this thing, right? Do I like the proportion of this amount of color to the proportion of this amount of color? Does it make sense? Does it feel good? You know, all that kind of stuff. You can make those choices in rendered mode and then go back into shaded mode and then just focus on, you know, the technicalities of the modeling. So sometimes I'll do that along the way. You know, I'll actually create materials and work on it along the way. So let's take a look at the next part of this. And I'm going to switch back up to my default layer, and I may actually lock the Bodhi mid as well. And then we can go and start looking at this piece here. And this should be a fairly easy piece. And in fact, we may even unlock Bodhi mid, go to shaded view. Maybe what we should do is we should just steal something because we've already made it. So let's right click on the explode icon and extract a surface with copy. So now I've just got a copy of this surface, which I can then invert hide everything or use the isolate command. And in this case, I'm going to hide Bodhi, the bottom. And we can start looking at our where the lines of this thing need to be. So I'm going to say, okay, well, it needs to be something like that. It needs to be something like that. It needs to have something in here. And because it's a toy, we don't have any straight lines. Everything's got to have some curves to it. So let's add some curve to this. True story. Cars and toys. You don't want straight lines on them. All right, so let's see what that does. And I'm going to grab these curves and I'm going to isolate so that I'm looking at just this. And I'm actually going to put these on the curve layer and hide those. So I know that this is about the shape that I want. And so maybe what I'm going to do, maybe if I extract an iso curve from here, maybe I can say, well, this is about where that thing should land. And then let's mirror it. And maybe it needs to be a little shorter. So I'm going to scale in one direction. And I'm going to just bring this back till it kind of sort of intersects there. And then I'm going to relocate my gumball back here. And I'm going to scale this curve a little flatter, like that. Actually, let's scale it dead flat because it's just going to be a trim curve. And let's look at kind of where that lands. And I'm going to scale it forward, something like that. And then, I don't know if you can hear this, but I've actually bored my dog to sleep. And she's laying under my desk dreaming. All right. And then I'm going to split this by an iso curve, and I'm going to just snap it there and knock the back of that off. So that kind of gives me the basis of what I need to do for this surface. And so I can kind of now, let's maybe just extrude a surface up and then pull it over to this point. All right, now we're just modeling with gumball, and I'm going to change degree on this to 3 and 3, turn its points on. Now we're not even using tools. Now we're just cheating. All right, I'm going to turn the points on for this. And now I can just pull this surface to give it a little shape. And then maybe what I want to do is I want to maybe do a sweep 1 along this rail. And that looks absolutely terrible, so let's not do that. Let's go to the front view and let's draw a new curve from the tip of this to here. That's close enough. Let's add some shape to it by pulling the points. And then we got a 4-side, or a sweep. We can do a sweep 2 actually. I can do that as a rail, and that as a rail. And that gives us something like that. I don't love how flat it is, but because we did it with history, we can just simply grab these 2 points and unflatten it a little bit, and that adds a little bit of shape to it. Let's mirror it. Let's join it all up, and then let's do a 3-sided surface in there. I don't like how that is, so let's do it 1, 2, 3. No, let's get 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to get the singularity at the front. There it is, like that. Join it up. And this is a open. It's open somewhere. Let's figure out where. Ah, it's open over here. All right, so let's just get rid of this. Shift Control click to get rid of it, and we'll just do a 4-sided surface to fix it. I edited one side of that surface and not the other. That's why it didn't join up. So now it's a closed poly surface. So let's bring everything back and see how we're doing. So that's kind of working. I think I'm gonna roll with it. Now the last part of this, check this out. We can just grab this guy and just go burp. Everybody's like, wait, what? Grab a surface, Shift Control click to grab a surface. Just grab the extrude dot. There we go. That's the cabin. And it doesn't really match up with our thing, so we're gonna, with our sketch, so we're gonna Shift Control drag. I'm gonna just move it forward so that it has the attitude that we're looking for. And then I'm probably just gonna hack the top of it off. So I actually may just pull this longer and just massively overbuild it. And it's missing here, like that is not kind of where we wanted this to be. So I might even grab this surface, scale it in one direction. Maybe I want it to be more like that. And then scale the entire thing in this direction to get kind of our overbuilt shape. Now there is a little offset in this, so I'm gonna allow myself the benefit of just cheating and just scaling this in a little bit, and then I'm gonna actually scale from this direction using scale 1. That and that, you know, just gives me a visual little offset. The front of this is gonna get hacked off anyways, and we'll deal with this situation because we can see that this is all gonna get trimmed out anyways. So let's just go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do that with wire cut. I'm going to do this with a control point curve to start with. So I'm going to come in here like this, 1, 2, 3 points to make a corner. And then let's wire cut this. Because it's a solid chunk, we can get away with wire cut, which gives us a clean cut that fills in the inside of this, which is kind of what we want right now. And you can see that we're getting away with, you know, our offset kind of works. Maybe we'd want to bend this in a little bit, but I'm not going to sweat it for this particular project. And then we have to decide, like, you know, do we want this kind of aspect on this thing, or does it need to come forward and then be flatter? I'm tempted to say that we'll just leave it like this. I was going to say something different, but I changed my mind. So let's just draw a line through here. Let's pull this down and let's wire cut that off. Same thing, we're just going to hack right through it. By the way, anybody who's new to Rhino, if I use a command and you're like, I don't understand what that command does or how to use that command, say for instance wire cut, run the command, hit the F1 key. It's going to bring up the help in a browser window for that tool. That works for anything in Rhino. Click a tool, hit the F1 key, it'll bring up the help for it. That's super useful. The other thing that you can do is, if you're learning, is there is a live update help over here. If you turn the auto update on, if I click a new tool, it brings up the help for the tool while you're working for everything. Okay. This does have to be internet connected, so you do have to connect to the internet, and sometimes this can cause some system slowdowns. So if it's causing system slowdowns, just turn the auto update off, and then you can type the command up here. But I like the F1 thing because I don't use it all the time, and every so once in a while, especially when there's a new feature that just came out, I will actually pull up that and take a peek at it. Now, I don't know if I'm feeling the pointy cabin on this thing. We may make a different decision here, but we'll see. And then the last piece that we need to make is the kind of the captain's roost up here. And so I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to just shift control click, and I'm just going to extrude. Boop, just put a hat on it. And then I'm going to extract without copy all of this stuff, and I'm going to scale it. I'm going to join it back up into its own chunk, and then I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and then I'm going to go to my front view, wireframe, and I'm going to start figuring out kind of what this does, and I'm going to just scale it. I'm going to get it close. I'm going to grab shift control drag this entire surface, and I'm going to just pull it backwards so that it gets the attitude that I want for the front. And then I'm going to scale 1 to get the attitude I want for the back. And then I'm going to scale the whole thing because I'm not matching on my drawing. And then I'm going to scale 1. And I'm going to kind of add that there. And then I'm just going to wire cut it because it's easy. And it gets me where I want to go. And I'm going to do this with a control point curve. So I'm going to pull through here. This round will get thrown on if there's a fillet later, so I'm going to leave that off for now. This round on the back, I probably need to draw in. So let's do that. I'm going to pull this a little more. And then let's wire cut this. How are you on time? Almost an hour. That's fine. Am I boring anybody to death yet? The reason that wire cut the bottom off is because it's an open poly surface. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, instead of wire cutting, I'm going to extrude, hold down shift, and we'll just do a traditional trim. Trim. And then trim. It's not closed on the bottom here, so I'm just going to get rid of that, and then we'll just connect it back up the old-fashioned way. It's easier than fixing the trim. Now, I've got an open top on here, so I'm going to put that back in just with this. And it looks like I've got something going on here that I need to figure out. See this weird artifact? That is an indication that there is something going on. And if I run cell bad, you can see that this lights up. So let's extract bad objects. And you can see that for some reason there's 2 little bad surfaces in there. I'm just going to delete them. Sell bad and extract bad surf are the commands that we use to mitigate that. All right, and let's match surf back here. Ooh, can't do it because this is a degree 1. So let's change the degree. There we go. Now it'll match. Can't move a degree 1 surface because it's only got 2 points. There's nothing in the middle to move. That's why it didn't update. So this kind of gives us the basis of our little boat. So now we can start doing things like, let's add the window pillars. And I'm going to add the window pillars. I'm going to be sneaky, and I'm going to grab these 2 curves, shift control click on this edge, shift control click on this edge, and I'm just going to pull this straight up. And it's going to make a big surface, which is fine. I'm going to go to shaded view or wireframe. And actually, I don't even need all this. So let's get rid of this. Shift control drag and delete, shift control drag and delete. That actually gave me what I wanted. So let's shift control drag, and then let's just pull this. And there is, and actually let's shift control drag. Let's just drag this down. Sub-object selections are beautiful for this kind of work. And that gives us our little center point. And we can decide, is this too much? Is it too big? Is it too fat? Whatever. If it's too fat, I'm going to right click and split by isocurve. And I'm just going to split this to be narrower. And if I like that one, I'll just mirror it over and join it. I'm going to grab this entire thing and I'm going to add some thickness to it by just extruding it straight back. And then I may actually even tuck this in just a little bit and then just tuck it into that so it intersects. And I'm doing that because I want those intersections, if I were to go back and Boolean this at a later date, I want these to have really positive overlapping intersections. All right, so that's our first pillar. Let's make our second pillar, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm just going to grab this curve and I'm just going to extrude it up. It's a nice cheater way of doing it, right? It's a lot easier than being, it's a lot easier being talented. And I'm going to shift control click this edge, and because it's a degree 1 surface, I can edit it, and I'm going to pull it back a little bit, and it looks like I'm missing my sketch by just a hair, so I'm going to just straighten that up a little bit, and it also looks like I'm missing it by missing the actual location a little bit, so I'm just going to slide it forward, and because I can always deal with it, not a big deal. Split by isocurve. Let's see what it looks like. It's not in the right spot, so let's move it. I may rotate this just a tiny bit so it fits better with that surface. And then let's see what it looks like as far as the thickness and all that kind of stuff with our sketch. It's a little fat, so I'm going to just thin it up just a little bit. And then let's add some thickness to it. And it looks like it needs to rotate a little bit more like that. And then I'm going to control, if I go to the top view and I isolate this, I want to actually extrude in this direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the C-plane waffle and I'm going to hold down the control key. And that allows me to drag in any direction in this control plane or construction plane. So I don't have to go X, Y, Z. So I can just come out and say, good. Bring that back, mirror it over, and we're good. Now, I don't like how, let's go to the right view. I don't like how straight vertical this is. So I'm going to grab this entire form stack here, and let's taper this. Let's grab and make the taper axis right smack dab down the center. And then let's grab this and let's just taper the entire thing out a little fatter. And now all those beautiful single span surfaces that we made are going to get rebuilt. See how it added so many spans there? I don't really care. I don't really care for this. And it got too much, right? See how that's too much? So maybe we need to make some adjustments, but I like the attitude of that. I like the kind of the stance and the playfulness of that. So I'm going to bring this forward a little bit. And then it's got a little bit of, I don't like this relationship up here. So we've already disturbed our beautiful single span surfaces. So I'm not gonna sweat it too much because we have already kind of gone down this path. So let's grab this guy and let's cage edit it. And I'm gonna use a bounding box, and I'm gonna use the world, and I'm gonna use a 4-point cage, and then let's just grab these. And I love this tool for toy stuff because it allows you to be able to add attitude to things. And I don't like this relationship back here, so I'm gonna drag select all these, then I'm gonna control drag select these, and I'm just gonna pull this a little roundier. Too much. Nudge is brilliant for this because you can just dial stuff in. And now we've got this nice little attitude. And in fact, on the right, maybe what we even want to do is, instead of having that be a taper, maybe we want this to be it's got a little puff to it. Maybe we pull this in like that. So now it's got this kind of chunky, playful kind of thing, right? So now we can do things like we can go crazy and we can take all of this stuff and we can just Boolean it. But before we do that, we need to think about it a little bit and say, okay, this piece and this piece, if this was just an early concept model, I'd probably just roll with this and call it done. If we needed to actually like add some wall thickness to this thing, what I would probably do is I would probably do that now. And the way that I would do it is I would go to the bottom and I would probably, and in this case, I would probably just draw it. I'm not even gonna get nuts with this, but I would probably just draw it because this would be an early model and I wouldn't sweat this too hard. But I would probably just draw my thickness in here. Now there is a shell command. I could shell this, and in fact, this actually may shell. Let's try it. A lot of times it doesn't, and I don't know. Let's see, let's figure out how big this thing is first, because that makes a difference. All right, so that's about 4 inches. So it's an 80 thousandths wall thickness is not insane. So let's shell it, and let's do 0.08. And then let's get rid of these two and see if it works. It might, and it did. In this case, it worked out great. And I always want to use shell on the very simplest version of the part. And let's do the same thing with this one. If you had added fillets and all sorts of stuff in there, chances are it would have died. Now, why did this fail? Well, probably because of the singularity at the end. Probably down here. But the cool thing about Rhino is when it fails, it actually gives you as much of the model as it can. And so that in that case, it'll give you at least what it can to work with. Now, we may be able to clean this up if we get rid of this surface and maybe we do something different, like we loft this from here to here and then we match surf. It might be that singularity is just too much for it to handle. We'll see. And let's give it a little bit bigger wall thickness. Oops, that didn't join. I will have to refine this now in order to add a little bit more information. Now it joined. Let's try shelling this. It may fail because of the singularity right down here. And let's do a 0.15 wall thickness for this one. So it failed again. But what it did was it gave us enough here that we could actually go ahead and just do it ourselves, right? So if we did a sweep one, this is the difference. This tool is much maligned. A lot of people complain about this tool and say, "Oh, the shell in Rhino is so bad." Well, maybe if you look at it that way, but the reality of the situation is when a shell fails in SolidWorks, it doesn't give you anything to work with. It just says nope. So you're screwed. In this case, maybe what I want to do is I want to blend this, and it's given me enough stuff that I can do that. Let's do it right. Chain these edges, and then I'm going to chain these edges, and then we're going to just do a nice little blend between those. And it's a little messy, so let's do it one at a time. Let's do that. And then let's go to the top view, Control-Shift-Click. I'm going to relocate my gumball to here, and I'm going to flatten this curve out. Deep. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Watch this. Control-Shift-Click. Relocate the gumball to here. Now, if I just scale, it's not going to do anything, right? Hold down Control, start dragging, hold down Alt, and snap the gumball to this line. Scale to 0. Straightens that out. So now when I mirror this, these two join up nicely, and then I have a perfect 2-rail sweep here to here. Gumball is a modeling superhero, and it doesn't get the credit that it deserves because the stuff that it can do is absolutely phenomenal. So that gives us our little shell, and then if we wanted to add, let's say we wanted to add a little door back here, which we need to because he can't get in his boat, or she. So actually a lot of sea captains who are women in Seattle. Here, and then I'm going to turn the points on, and I'm going to scale this out because I want it to kind of match the doorway there, like that. And then you can see I broke my tangency up here, so let's fix it. I'm going to actually explode this curve, and I'm going to get rid of these, and then I'm going to put them back with a blend curve, which lives in here. Nothing that we're doing here is terribly, terribly complicated. And so I want to, if you're feeling like overwhelmed and this seems like a lot, if you break it down, we made most of this model with straight lines that we just bent, right? We made extrusions, we bent a few things, we cage edited a few things, we extruded a few things, and really at the end of the day, the complication is just the ambitiousness of the build, not necessarily the build itself. Let's do a Boolean split. And we're just going to take that piece out. For some reason, the bottom didn't split. Oh, because it doesn't contain. So I actually have to cap this like that. It didn't contain any volume down there. So let's Boolean split again. Has to make an enclosed volume in order for Boolean split to work. So that gives us our door. And now we're in a position where we can start taking a peek at this and say, what else do we want to do? Now we can start having fun, right? That gives us the kind of things that we need to do. Looks like we got a junk surface up here that we'll get rid of. Maybe we need to hog this out. I'll show you a trick for doing that. Let's do this in shaded mode. let's grab this surface and we're going to copy it, join it, scale it. Oops. Looks like it didn't copy. And it looks like this one isn't closed either. So let's close it up first. I'm violating my chunk rule here. There we go. Now let's extract, copy, join, scale, sneak this back a little bit, extrude, and then just Boolean difference. You guys are all like, man, there's a lot of cheating in toy modeling. Yes, yes there is. Looks like these did not join, so let's Boolean those together and then Boolean subtract this. We got an open edge back here? Yeah, that's why. We got an open edge back here, that's why that failed. So let's fix it. Four-sided surface. Join. Those go away. Bring this back. Bring this back. Isolate. Boolean difference. That worked now. And then we can decide, like, do we want to blend this off? Do we want to, like, how do we want to start building our transition surfaces? And in this case, I think that we're an hour and 15. I think that the main goals here have been achieved. And let's, instead of spending our time worrying about like how we're going to blend, this stuff off, which we would just do with a right click and start, adding this stuff. He says he's not going to worry about it and then goes ahead and does it anyways. We're going to preview this. We're going to sell all. Still too big. We can start messing around with this stuff and say, okay, this is how we're going to start smoothing things off. I think everybody kind of understands that. Let's look at a few other details in here and get the the end result so that we can have the basic model all the way done. Let's put the wheel in here. And we're going to rotate this 90. And let's make it very captain-y. Let's scale this down. Let's take a sphere and let's stick it here. And then let's change the degree of the sphere to 3 and 3 so it's editable. And let's rotate the sphere 90. And then it needs to actually be this way, 90. And let's grab these, scale that flat, pull this up, grab this, scale it in. Maybe this comes up this way, and these get smaller. And then we go to the right view, and then we scale this whole thing down. Stick it in here like that, and then we transform array polar. We use a center snap. And let's do, I don't know, 7. And we've got our ship's wheel. We're going to just Boolean it together. Bloop. We'll put a center spot in here. I'm just going to do that with a sphere. And then Let's do some cylinders to connect them. And I'm going to change my direction to none, and that allows me to pull it straight out like this. Like that. And then we'll do transform array polar. Like that. And that defends my OCD that those don't line up, so we'll line those up. And we may have to Boolean these one at a time. Let's see. I'll take it. All right, fantastic. Sometimes if the Booleans overlap inside the other thing, it makes a problem. So that's our, whoo, that's way too big. Here. Bring it down like that. Let's make a little stand for it to sit on. I'm going to do that with a rounded rectangle from the center. I'm going to smash this down in here like that. Extrude, cap, little scale, little move, tuck it in there somewhere like, whoops, tuck it in there somewhere like that. And we probably want to hack the bottom off. So let's go to wireframe and we'll just do that with a straight line. Trim. Now this is open because we trimmed it, so I'm going to run cap to make it closed. And then we can decide whether we want to smush this in there or not later, but we'll have that little detail. So let's make the life ring, and we'll do that the same way. We'll just grab this with a torus, and I'm going to just stick it to the edge so I know it's located correctly. Way too big. Something like that. And then I'm going to copy paste, and I'm going to, actually let's not even do that. Let's just offset this. Let's do surface offset. And I'm going to offset it just a little bit, like, I don't know, 0.04. And then we can trim. Let's go from the, we don't need to go from the center. Go like that. I am going to mirror it around the center though. Like that. We can trim this off. Oops. Pick the right thing. Yeah. Let's go to shaded view so we can see what we're doing. And then let's just polar array, transform array polar from the center. And we're going to do 4 of these. Boolean. And then we could go and we could refine this later if we wanted to by, you know, blending off these edges with just a teeny tiny little blend. Something like that, right? But I'm not going to sweat that stuff at this point because I feel like everybody kind of understands how to do a blend. Maybe not. Maybe we'll do another video that's just blending. So I'm going to stick this like that. It does intersect this model to the inside. If that's troublesome, we can pull this out a little farther than we need it. We can do a Boolean split. We don't want to delete the inputs. And then delete this chunk that's inside. And then there's a little chunk still here. And then take this and push it in back to where we kind of wanted it. And then mirror it over. So that's our detail for that. And we would do the same thing with the anchor if we were to build, you know, if we were to go ahead and build that. So so we're at 10:20 right now. How's everybody doing? Am I killing you? Do you want to see me build the anchor and the flag and stuff like that? Or is everybody kind of done? I'm trying to be a little sensitive to not stealing your entire day. These are recorded, so if you get to the point where you just can't take it anymore, you can watch it on video and then fast forward of the parts you don't care about. All right, that's our flag. Ooh, let's undo that and put it where it's supposed to be. There we go. Let's draw our little flag. Two rail sweep. I'm going to gumball relocate to here. I'm going to control rotate so my axis goes along my flagpole, and then I'm going to scale to 0 so it flattens out that one end. That gives me my flag. I'm going to give it a little thickness by shift dragging the control dot or the extrude dot, and then let's center it, and then we can Boolean that together. And then I'd probably jaunty it just a little bit so that it's not dead. All right. So I think that's about as far as I'm going to take this. I think that's probably plenty to get across kind of what we needed to do. And I'm going to get rid of this edge display, get rid of my curves. And because we did this, we built our materials now, if I switch over to ray trace mode, I can get a render out of this. And that is most likely enough to be able to send to a client and get some feedback, right? This would probably be when I'd send it to them. I would not do the fillets and transitions before I got feedback, because if they come back and they say, ooh, this line needs to change, taking the fillets out and redoing them is a complete and utter pain. So I always do my first draft of a project at this point. So the one thing I will show you, let's talk about the anchor for just a second, because there is actually a cool way to do this. So let's get rid of all this for a second. The anchor, there's a tool called multi-pipe, which is really kind of awesome. And if we do this, it's a sub-D tool. If we draw this anchor like this, and the curves are all in the same plane, but they're overlapping, and I run multi-pipe, and I run it, let's set the point radius to like, let's do 0.04. It'll make a sub-D object with all of those curves joined. And in this case, then we can just come in and clean it up a little bit. And if we wanted to, we can grab these ends and stitch them to round this off. This is great for toy stuff because it makes nice, really kind of cool details that are nice and soft. And typically that's what toy clients are looking for, especially preschool clients. I worked for Fisher-Price for years, so I did a million little preschool toys. And we can just get rid of any edges that we don't need, and that makes for a nice little anchor detail. I'm going to bend this. We'll do something like that. All right, let's go to our rendered view. Make that part of the bottom part. There we go. And I'm going to hide the sub-D wires because I don't want to see them. And that's our little detail. All right, so that's our boat. We're what, an hour and a half for something that we could throw through a printer, do a couple of renderings from, get some client feedback, start our refinement process. I would imagine probably another maybe a half hour, 40 minutes of adding refinements, and we'd have something that we could call a quote, final-ish model that we could then, really start to do some detailing on. But, the techniques here are not mysterious. They're not intimidating. Everything that we did here is fairly simple, with the exception of watching me screw up a line and orient. But other than that, everything else is fairly simple stuff, fairly vanilla NURBS modeling stuff. So I hope that the idea of being able to use this stuff as a design tool as opposed to just copying a sketch is starting to sink in, where you're starting to say, okay, I do see how the model, to my eye, looks better than the sketch. It's got more attitude, it's got more playfulness, the lines are obviously drawn much better and all that kind of stuff. So alrighty, fantastic. Thank you for coming. We do these about once a month. And hope to see you in another one here before too terribly long. So my name's Kyle Houchins, technical trainer for McNeil. This is Getting Started Rhino 7 for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.